you know, we still need the stories, whether we read modern novels or not. It's like, you know, we need that connection, whether it's with our elders or with our kids. You know, we pass these stories on as something precious. For me personally, it's probably just the unknown, you know. I've always been drawn more to the unknown and whatever the beyond of normal life. So I would actually go out and look for these. You know, we would go to haunted houses. We would go to haunted areas of the cities. See what was going on, you know? Yeah, now, whatever that comes from, I don't know. But it kept life interesting.
It was almost like an escape.
Definitely an escape. Family life was not a happy life. So that was an escape, definitely.
Hey, welcome to the Floaties for Krakens podcast. I am your host, Camille Maria Costa, and it is a brilliant day to be monstrous. Hey, you brilliant Cuttlefish. Welcome back to Season 3, Episode 13 of Floaties for Krakens. And happy Valentine's Day, by the way. Did y'all know that next to Halloween and Dia de los Muertos, this holiday is one of my absolute favorites? Ever since I was little, I was very enamored with the idea of making cards for my little friends and giving them candy. I loved crafting those mailboxes. Do you remember those? Out of, like tissue boxes, and leaving them on my desk all day. And we'd go around the room delivering tiny cardstock Valentines with like the Power Rangers or Barbie or dinosaurs on them. Just making it a point to tell everyone that we loved how important they were in our lives and to eat a gummy worm and just keep going. Well, this is my virtual card to you, Cuddles. Eat a gummy worm today and keep going because you matter and you freaking rock. Well, we finally made it. The finale of our super special Silk and Sinew series is finally here. I can't believe it. I am just so sad that this chapter is closing, to be honest. It was so freaking cool. Oh, and in case you've missed parts 1 and 2, which you should totally go back and watch them if you haven't, okay? A couple months ago, I was in contact with the incredibly lovely Kristy P. Kulski, who is an immensely talented Korean-American writer and just a powerhouse of an artist. She mentioned an anthology that she was working on that is on the horizon, and she came up with the incredible idea of hosting a few specials to promote not only the amazing piece of work itself, but the brilliant authors behind it. On May 6th, 2025, Kristy's anthology titled Silk and Sinew, a collection of folk horror from the Asian Diaspora, will premiere for the world to see. With a very special thanks to Bad Hand Books, shout out, Silk and Sinew will tease forth folk horror rooted in the experience of the Asian diaspora, from lengths of muscle and vein, ground bones, endless ropes of sinew. It is with our bodies folk horror is woven. The anthology will include stories, poetry, and essays on history and folklore. Now, for today's episode, I introduce to you 3 truly phenomenal authors that will be featured in this very collection. Aida Shonibar, she, they, Rowan Cardosa, they, them, Nazar Joyan, he, him, and I'm so excited to finally introduce to you Kristy Park Kulski, she, her. And all of their bios and wonderful information will be in the links below. And of course, thanks to Kristy's own brilliant brain, this specific episode explores metamorphosis in the world of Asian folk monsters, and how transformation is complicated but necessary in our cultural makeup. Kristy, Aida, Rowan, Naz, Thank you all so much for being here today and chatting with us. Each of you are groundbreaking writers, and you help readers all over the world finally feel seen and feel understood. Especially in the world that we live in today, just thank you so much for being a guiding light for us little monsters, for those of us who need a hand to hold. Just a quick content warning for this episode. In the following interview, there will be mentions and discussions of death, gore, body horror, physical abuse, mental abuse, racism, homophobia, mental health difficulties, abortion, and generational trauma in this episode. Do whatever you need to do to feel safe. Now, I want to leave you with this. Ironically enough, this very quote opened our very first episode of Floaties all the way back in 2023. But it's fitting for today. You'll see why. In the words of Vietnamese-American poet Ocean Vuong, "You're not a monster," I said. But I lied. What I really wanted to say was that a monster is not such a terrible thing to be. From the Latin root monstrum, a divine messenger of catastrophe, then adapted by the Old French to mean an animal of myriad origins: centaur, griffin, satyr. To be a monster is to be a hybrid signal, a lighthouse, both shelter and warning, all at once. Ladies and Cuttlefish, let me introduce to you Lighthouses for folk monsters. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Gosh,
Hey,
for those of you who are unaware, we've had such an interesting morning, afternoon, with technical difficulties. I have a feeling that we somehow invited spooky ghosts with us into
Yay.
this roundtable, because my goodness, what interesting things we were all hearing out of our headphones. But hi, everyone. It's so
well,
freaking amazing to have you here, and it's going to be such a joy talking with you all today. How's
we're
everybody
excited to
doing?
be here.
It's all right, considering like everything. But,
Hmm.
you know, life goes on, which is, I wish it maybe it didn't.
I know it's it is a very complicated time right now. I think there's a lot of mixtures of emotions, and just the world is really going through it. But I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's really important that we keep doing this kind of stuff, right? Like writing this kind of stuff, reading this kind of stuff, having conversations about this kind of stuff. So I think that's extra especially why I was very excited for today's conversation, because I think it's going to be really meaningful and really important. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, before we get into the nitty-gritty and talk about the amazing collection that you all are a part of, why don't we go around the room and everybody can introduce themselves. If you wouldn't mind stating your pronouns and just telling us who you are. What do you do? So yeah, I'll pick on you like popcorn, as if we were in class. Let's go ahead and start with Kristy, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Don't. Hello, everyone. I am Kristy Kulski, she, her. I am the editor of Silk and Sinew. I'm a Korean American author. I wrote Ferris Flesh and House of Pungsu. Was Stoker nominated last round of Stokers. Teach history at a college in Northeast Ohio, where I live now, and with a couple kids and my husband in the woods. That's me.
What a dream author life. Kristy's literally so incredible. Everybody in this room, I will be saying that for the entirety of this interview, is so amazing, and we're just so thankful to have you. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks.
Aida, how about yourself?
Hi, I'm Aida. I'm really excited to be here today. My pronouns are she, they. And I wanted to thank Camille for having us and bringing us together in this conversation, and also for steering us through the technical and ghostly difficulties that we seem to be navigating. I write dark and wistful speculative fiction about misfits, monsters, and mischief makers. I enjoy writing across different genres and age categories. Some of my short stories, essays, and poetry have appeared in various publications.
As Nas said earlier, that's great alliteration. I love
Helps to
that.
remember, yeah.
That's amazing. And I love that. I don't know. I feel like, well, all of your work is really awesome, everybody here. But I can't wait to pick your brains as to what specifically, Aida, got you to pick those specific words to describe your writing. So I think this is going to be a fun conversation.
I look forward to it.
Rowan, how about yourself?
All right. My name's Rowan. My pronouns are they, them. This is actually like the first piece of fiction I've written that's been professionally published. So I'm kind of excited. I've been going through like a dry spell with my writing for a long time, like years and years and years. And I was just thinking, fuck it, why not write like a thing? Why not get back into this? I only have one life. The world's on fire. But prior to that, I've mostly just been writing listicles about video games. It's not a super exciting job, but I kind of enjoy it.
That sounds pretty cool.
Um, so this, like I said, this is the first piece of original fiction I've written that's been professionally published. I refuse to disclose what kinds of weird fan fiction I've written over the years.
Listen, in my opinion, the greatest authors out there, right, did a little dabble in that kind. So I think it's amazing.
I know, but like my AO3 will go unspoken because I will hide my secret shame. I will say I enjoy very visceral, messed up kind of fiction.
Yeah.
A lot of it kind of stems from stuff that I was exposed to in my childhood that might not have been developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
But I like a lot of guts, a lot of like gore stuff. And I don't know what that says about me, but it gets kind of reflected in the stuff I want to create.
Well, I think that's amazing. And I think you're in good
Yeah.
company in this room, right? When it comes to kind of writing things, not only influenced by your past or by what you go through or what you observe, but horror in general, right? I think is a beautiful outlet for a lot of dark stuff happening in the world, like we just talked about, in our minds, from people, right? It's a very awesome creative way to express yourself. So, and we'll definitely get into that too, Rowan, and you can always express more on that matter. But you're in good company, definitely, in this room. All right, Naz, how about yourself?
Hey, I'm Naz, Robert Nazar Harjoyan. My pronouns are he, him. Born and raised in LA. I'm an Armenian American writer. I'm really excited to be a part of this anthology. And my work, mostly genre, but I do a lot of like literary writing too, like just straight up literary writing. And I've been published in a few places, and it's very gratifying to keep receiving those acceptances. But it's also nice to get a bunch of rejections to fill up the gas tank and keep going too. I have something. Well, we're recording this on the 8th. I don't know when this is coming out, but I have something coming out in the Deadlands this month, and Korean Cross Keys also. So, it's good. There's stuff happening. There's stuff coming out. I think it's my 41st or 42nd short story to be published. So it's very exciting. I love it. And when I'm not writing, I'm a video editor by day. I love spending time with my wife, my son, my dog. And, that's the short of it. I'll keep going, but I should stop.
That's
Hey.
pretty impressive.
Well, listen, yeah. That's well, congratulations on all of your,
Thank you.
published material and for things that are coming out. This episode will release next week. So,
Oh, okay. We're in
this is
time.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be in time, but that's amazing. That's so wonderful. And what a colorful life you've led so far. You sound very busy.
I'm
Very busy.
busy to the point where I haven't written a word since, I'll tell you, I have my little word log here. I haven't written a word since January 3rd.
Ooh,
So see, zero words, zero words, zero words.
okay, I
Too
love that
busy, but
system.
I got to get back to it.
Maybe
I got to
this
get
maybe
back
this
to it.
conversation will
It's
uh
like that
Yeah.
SpongeBob meme. The
Which,
which one?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. There's like
like
a
the
page with beautifully
oh,
decorated
The
and then
yeah.
got
but
it.
clearly a
Got
lot
it.
of love and care went into the.
Yeah.
Exactly. Into that one word.
That's art.
It is. It is. Well, Naz, I'm going to start with you.
Oh,
Before we get into this horror stuff, right? I'm
okay.
curious, what kind of influenced you to start writing? How did you choose this career that you have in front of you?
Well, I've always enjoyed reading. Ever since I was a little boy. I always liked books, like just books, as you can see there. I've still amassed books over time and passed that on to my son now, and he enjoys reading very much, which I also enjoy watching him read and reading
Oh.
to him. But my aunt is an English teacher in high school, and I had one of those of my own teachers in middle school that like the Robin Williams teacher,
Yeah.
in Dead Poets. Like I had one of those, and so he really instilled literature even further. So like him and my aunt both were kind of catalysts into my love for literature. And I guess I'm so sorry. Like now, way to start. Well, the question was about how did I get into
No,
writing?
that's okay.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. You're answering it
Um,
perfectly.
but I never really wrote while I was growing up. I was much more interested in filmmaking, and that's what I went to school
Oh.
for. And that's like the career that I pursued until about maybe 2 3 years ago, or I just kind of felt burned out on it, and it was like right after COVID.
Yeah.
I just, you know, the joy of it was had been sort of seeping out over time. And so one day I just said, I think I'm going to write a short story. I don't know why. And I just, like 30 minutes later, I had a short story done. And no one's probably ever going to read it because it's a pretty silly short story, but it kind of opened a door that, like, I was the one who was able to open the door. In other words, with filmmaking, there are so many people that you need to open the door for you.
Mm.
Whereas in this case, it was like in such a finite amount of time, I was able to start and finish something. And the only person in my way is me. So that's after that short story, I just started to write more and more. And I think this was in 2023 or 2022. I don't know. And then later that year, I started submitting when I had enough stuff to submit. And, I haven't looked back since.
Gosh. Well, first of
Yeah.
all, shout out to every teacher every
Yeah.
Robin Williams as teacher I think that we've all had. Or parent, guardian, aunt, right? In your
Yeah.
case, that um nurtured that love, not only for reading and writing and things, but just like nurtured your creativity as a kid to be
Yeah.
like, go for it, right? Like go
Yeah.
do your thing, do your thing.
And I have to
Um,
throw my mom in there too, because my mom, she always had a book in her hand, and that was like seeing that
yeah.
is like, oh, it's cool to read, it's okay to read, like
Yeah.
it was like encouragement that way too. And both of my parents were incredibly encouraging during the filmmaking, and even now, like they're very gung ho about everything I try to do. So props to my parents too.
Props to your parents. Shout out.
Yeah, yeah.
You're right, just like those visual moments of just seeing that is
Hmm.
so transformative for a kid. We're so impressionable.
Yeah,
And that's amazing. I love that words have always been surrounding you, no matter what. And I think it's very fascinating that your career, in exploring film, right, and telling stories in that medium, right? I
yeah.
love what you said about you're piloting your own creativity and like, no, I'm gonna write this short story, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it out there. I'm gonna, or
And
you know,
and I think too, the camera in your head is better than what my camera can ever do. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
So like,
mm-hmm.
I think I can craft a sentence that will be a better shot in your head than I can craft a shot. You know what I'm saying?
I
Does that
totally,
make sense? Yeah.
totally. And
So,
you know, like I don't, granted, you know, I don't know what you all experience. I've never had, you know, the experience of like the writing world and sort of like the publishing aspects of things and whatnot. But I had a performance background too, Nas, and like there are a lot of things in that industry that can be so deflating and
mhm.
so, oh man, I mean, it's just so painful. And I'm sure that's, you know, the case in a lot of areas, but I'm really inspired by the fact that you were like, no, I'm putting my pen to paper and I'm telling this story. And I think not only is it beneficial for you, but for other people that identify with you and your story and need those stories heard and don't want them constantly shot down
Mm.
by, like for in this case, right, things in the film industry.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. Yeah, yeah. Well, Rowan, how about yourself? How did writing come into the picture?
I mean, I've always kind of been writing
Yeah.
since like middle school, I think. And like I said before, a lot of this was fan fiction that will forever live on in my secret shame. I think I just deleted a lot of my old stuff from like before I was 16. And now I kind of wish I hadn't, but like you got to understand, I was like 18 when I made that decision. I was like, oh God, this is so cringe. But I've kind of pretty much ever since I was in elementary school. And I thought like, oh man, words, this is pretty cool. Hey, I can do words too. Watch me put words on paper. Watch me do it again. And I went into college for literature, found out that's not really a major that translates well to like paying jobs. So went into grad school again for like library science.
Mm.
Yeah.
And all through that, I've just been kind of writing both weird fanfic and then the listicles I mentioned earlier about video games, because I mean that's what pays the bills, kind of. But and then I have the day job on top of that. But
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just kind of always been with me. And I kind of wish I could point to like one thing in my past and say, this is the thing. This is the thing that inspired me. But that doesn't really happen for like anybody, I think.
You're right. It's a collection of instances and moments. Like Na said, right? Like there's different these picture perfect moments you have in your mind of like, oh, you know, I wrote this fanfic once and I felt awesome writing it and it made somebody feel some sort of emotion when they read it, right? For example, or this teacher encouraged me to keep writing, right? Like I think that's what's so awesome about artists.
I think this is going to sound kind of messed up, but my foray into horror came when I realized I'm better at accentuating the things that make me feel not great
Mm.
about the world, about like things. And I was like, I'm good at describing really gross stuff. How can I turn this into art? Well, there's not many avenues for that other than becoming a horror weirdo.
That's a really, really wonderful point. I love that that's your extension, like that's your medium, um, to feel like, you know, feel best expressing those feelings and those thoughts.
We're holding up like the weird funhouse mirror to society. And I didn't like come up with that comparison. I stole that from somebody else's TikTok comment, but it's true.
Yeah, I love that. And we're really, really gonna get into the metaphors you're speaking about today. So keep that in mind. Keep that house mirror in your mind, Rowan.
Yay, metaphors.
Metaphors. Well, Aida, how about yourself? When did you start writing, or how did you fall in love with it?
So to be honest, I can't remember the begin like the origins of it.
Yeah.
But as Naz was saying, like for me, I do remember things like my parents reading to me and like sharing books with me. So it's actually so beautiful to hear you doing that with your son, and I have no doubt that
Mm,
that's going to have such a big impact long term. Because then it kind of grows into its own thing. Like, you know, everyone has their own interests, their own niches, and but it starts, you know, wherever it starts, it then grows into each person's individual journey with
yeah.
books. And I just think that's really beautiful. And I know like I remember like at meal times, my grandmother would tell me and my cousins a lot of Bengali folk tales, and those are all quite scary.
Yes.
Looking back, like some of them were quite intense. But I mean, I love them, and I would sometimes like, and my cousins as well would sometimes like struggle with eating. So it was like having that as you know, you're like kind of cocooned in this circle of storytelling to help you through that as well. It was just very nice having that
Mm,
communal space, different way of like, you know, sharing food, sharing stories to bring the family together. So I those are some of my earliest memories of storytelling, that and like my parents. And I also was very lucky that there were teachers who would encourage my writing. Like, you know, sometimes you get these school assignments and you're given some freedom to explore a topic however you want to. And I guess I didn't always clock that I kept defaulting to creative writing because that's how I liked exploring ideas. And I often would get encouraging responses from that, and I'm really grateful to the teachers who took that seriously. Because as a kid, sometimes you know you can feel like using creative writing as a way to try to deeply explore topics. If an adult then is like, "Why are you doing it like this?" or you know, or maybe they don't get it or they don't resonate with it, you might feel like, "Oh, this is not the right way to explore topics and ideas." And related to that, you also asked like how I came to writing in general. So I have far too many thoughts. I've always had too many thoughts. They're not necessarily very coherent or even deep. They're not always welcome. Some are abstract, some are like a long, drawn out primal scream. And then sometimes it's just a running commentary that ends up consuming 99% of my daily energy expenditure. So writing helps me sort through a lot of these thoughts to like clarify relationships between things and to organize my feelings. So it's basically like emotional information processing. And this actually something that Rowan said really resonated with me as well, which is not being able to look back or access, like, because I guess it's all lost now, but some of the earlier writing pieces that we might have had like when we were young and like as kids, I would love to look back at that, and because I think it would have captured these snapshots of what I was thinking and feeling and how I understood the world, and the logic that was like going through my head at the time. But yeah, so I guess that's not something we can look back at all the time, but I think that would have been very cool.
Such beautiful thoughts that you just mentioned. I mean, first of all, I love your folkloric upbringing. I think a lot of us can relate to that in terms of you write this really amazing storytelling in a circle, right? Like just bare bones, like that's what it was. And I love how you mentioned like it helped so many other aspects of difficult life, right? It made eating easier, it made talking easier, it made conversing and laughing and feeling easier just a little bit, if even for that hour, right, that you spoke with your parents, even if they scared the crap out of you with a very terrifying story that will haunt you for the rest of your life, right?
I loved it though. I don't think I was even
Yeah.
scared. I was just like, I need to know what happens next.
Yeah, it invites this curiosity. And, you know, like my dad always said, I grew up, you know, I'm Mexican, right? And so I grew up very similarly in the way that my dad would tell me the scariest things in the freaking world. And but in that moment, right? And I'm sure you feel the same. You were safe and you were taken care of and you were having a good moment and it was fun. It was exciting. And I love that it seems that you've kept that with you um, throughout your life and throughout writing. And I love how you said too, right, that like writing is just a different form of expression for very busy thoughts, for very confusing thoughts, for thoughts that you're like, why are you even hear in my head the scream that you said, right? Like, I think it's amazing that writing found you when it did, and that you're continuing to write for other people that read your work that also feel the same way, that need that escape, that need something to illustrate how they're feeling, right? And I think that's what, I mean, all of you do that. And I think, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful that these are the roads that you've chosen to express yourself.
Something
Really.
that is interesting, like as you're saying this, I was remembering that like the role or purpose that writing had at different stages of my life, it also changed because I remember writing is involved like really important when you're learning a new language, and
Yeah.
it kind of had a different role there, and then that also shaped how your relationship with that language. And then now that's a different relationship from when I was in that learning process. I mean, of course, it's an ongoing learning process, but it's like a different part now compared to before. So I think even the role of writing, even though it's always about like processing these thoughts, as you were saying, it also, yeah, I don't know. It's just it's very fluid.
Yes, yes, you can learn so much by just writing down a sentence, as you said, in different parts of your life, in different contexts. Yeah, that's such a fascinating thought. Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, Kristy, how about you? How did writing begin for you?
Oh, well, so I'm gonna bring everyone down. I'm sorry.
That is
Sorry in
okay.
advance. So like honestly, my story with writing is a lot about survival. I had a really rough upbringing. So my mother passed away when I was and it's like doing feedback.
Oh, I don't know. It might, you know what? It might be coming actually, Aida, from yours. Would you mind muting? Thank you. Okay, go for it.
I figured it was me. Yeah, so my mom passed away when I was young, and a lot of physical abuse happened growing up. So I got really into reading, and it was my escape, and I read like everything. Um, so I started writing at a pretty young age. It was mostly poetry, and it's kind of what got me through it and got me to survive on the other side. And and it's been my relationship with it has been always been kind of a lifeline. It's something I need in order to make it, and cope. So lots of writing right now as
Yeah.
well, so we can cope. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm so angry and so sorry that you had to experience such complicated circumstances when you were growing up. That's horrible, and you never deserved any of that at all. And I'm just so happy, Kristy, that you found poetry and writing. I mean, that's so, God, yes, storytelling, writing is survival. That's what it is at its core, right? It's as we've all talked about, right? A way for you to feel human in really crappy monstrous situations. It just reminds you like, oh my gosh, like I have these feelings and these thoughts and creativity, and I have autonomy, and I have the ability to control something in this way that I might not have control of outside of this. And poetry, that's so, of course you explored poetry. You have such brilliant writing, and I love that was your outlet, and I love that it's held your hand and guided you to this point, right? To this point in your life, and which you do the same for other readers as well.
I definitely hope that, when you write, like you sort of still write for your kid's self in some ways, or the things you wanted to see. So yeah, definitely. It's, and it's like a sad story, but at the same time, it ends up really positive, and
I
I'm so
def
thankful to be
Oh,
here.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm so thankful to be here. I'm so thankful to have this opportunity to write and share with others. And I'm so excited about Silk and Sinew and everything you guys are doing. You guys gave me such amazing, amazing stories.
I definitely feel that when you say writing for your kid's self, because I mean, I grew up in the Texas public school system, which is its own brand of horror show, and like you still see it with to this day with the book bans and whatnot.
Mhm.
Realizing I was gay was sometime in high school. Realizing I was non-binary was years and years and years later, but I always knew there was something off about me and that a lot of the things I was seeing just did not relate to me at all, just because I don't know what it's like to be a cis person. Oh my God, what the heck is that even?
Yeah.
So I realized that if I felt like a weird little freak, I had to become the weird little freak that I wanted to see in the world.
Mhm.
And if that meant writing weird little freaky shit, then well, that was my calling.
Yeah. That's beautiful, Rowan. I'm right there with you. I also grew up in the Texas school system.
It's not
Horrible.
great.
Not great, not great. And I really love, again, right? It's almost like the bat signal, right? For weird little freaks, right? When you're able to write that stuff, right? You're telling other kiddos that it's okay to feel
Oh
these
no, they're coming
things.
after the children.
Yeah, I think that's
I'm
amazing.
sure that one bitch who like gets bomb threats called in on kids is gonna be just having a field day with this.
No, I think it's important, and I love your journeys to this point. It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense, seeing the writing that you all put out there, definitely. Well, Kristy, you mentioned, of course, this collection, this fun little collection that we're celebrating today. So, Kristy, can you first tell us a little bit about Silk and Sinew, and how it came about?
I'll just start with how it came about because I think it kind of explains itself. So like 2022, I was at StokerCon in Denver, and I was attending a folk horror panel. Um, it's funny because I was just sitting there and listening, so much great conversation. And one of the things that kept getting brought up was how folk horror is what you dig up. I like that secret thing that you've buried that's been in the soil, for so long, and you pull it back out and you discover, oh my gosh, I found a jawbone. What's that all about? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But I kept thinking to myself, what does that mean for the Asian diaspora? You know, no matter where you are, like our connection, is not exactly going to be the same. Um, and I thought, well, what is the soil for us? And I realized it's really, our body. Um, when you have like, and I think about my mom, like her immigration story is so like filled with pain, and she carried that forever, and that's like passed down. So it's like we hold it. And like I've seen so many of us like start to dig into our family histories, or just like history of like heritage cultures, and find so many things that startle us. And those are the bones that we're digging up. Those are the things. So I leaned over to my friend, Effie Rose, and I said, "Oh, there needs to be, an anthology on this, for the diaspora." And she goes, she always does something like this, like, "Well, why don't you do it?" I was like, "Well, okay, I will." So I text Lee Murray at the
Oh,
time, who I didn't know was in a meeting with a agent at that moment.
of
And she,
course.
right, of course, being Lee though, she goes, "Oh, I like this idea. What do you think about this?" To the agent. So it's been a journey. There's been a long, winding journey to get to this point now with the book actually coming out. But it's been so great to see what everyone else thinks of what that means to them. And I think that's it's an open-ended question. It means something different to all of us, but there's like these interesting meeting points.
Oh, that's so exciting. Oh my gosh. Like that, first of all, thank you so much for thinking this up, because it's so important and so necessary, like you mentioned, to have all of these voices. And I love me some folk horror. I think it is so important and so necessary And like you said, right, you discover so much about yourself, you know, your family's immigration history, your cultural traditions, why things the way that they are. You know, something that I always say is generational trauma is folklore too, because it was unintentionally passed down to us. And I feel like briefly understanding all of the stories now that are going to be, most of the stories that will be in this collection, I think you've given a lot of people the space to process a lot of hard stuff and to also celebrate a lot of amazing things culturally, you know, and it's just hilarious. It's so funny. We were talking about luck too earlier, right? You got to have a little bit of luck. And I think it's so fitting that Lee Murray happened to be in that.
Of course she is. Yeah, she's
Of
she does
course.
so much. Yeah, and she's so humble about all.
God. And she speaks so highly of you, Kristy. I had the pleasure of having her on the show a couple episodes ago, and she is very excited about this collection, as we all are. I cannot wait. Cannot wait. And when does it release?
May 6th.
May 6th, everybody. Put it on your calendars right now. All of these amazing people are going to be a part of it. And it's, I can't tell. I mean, it's just going to be so cool. It's going to be one of the best anthologies you've ever read. I'm serious. I'm saying that now in this recording. It's going to be so much fun. Such
You
a
can
great read.
pre-order it too.
You can pre-order it. We'll put the link down below where you can pre-order everything and get your copies as soon as possible. It's going to be so great. It's going to be so great, Kristy.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. So here is probably the most difficult question that I will ask each of you, potentially, in this interview. And Naz, I'm going to start with you.
Oh boy.
Naz, in your words, what do you think is a monster?
A monster is probably the thing that we don't want to be. And excuse me, I don't know if that's the right answer even for myself, but I think as pertains to the story in Silk and Sinew, I think that's what came out. I think it's whatever happens to the characters in the story, and I want to give it away. It's like the worst possible outcome for a person. But it's like a destination reached out of desperation, out of what one might think is necessity or need, because of the circumstances that they find themselves in. So it's like, in the specific case of the story, I would say it's like a monster is probably a mistake. It's probably like the biggest mistake that one could make, and whether that's personal or like societal, I don't know. That's what it seems like to me, off my gut right now and off my brain. It's the thing that you don't want to have happening, whether to yourself or to others or to whatever culture or society.
I love that your definition has so much fear attached to it, right? Like this idea of like, I don't want to be that. I don't long to be considered
Yeah.
a monster, right? And that's such a wonderful way of looking at it. And such a strong word, right? Mistake, right? Which you know, growing up we're all taught everybody makes them, right? And this happens, it makes you human. Right. But it's
Yeah.
interesting. I love this idea of it makes you a monster in this way, and which will break down even more so. But all right. Interesting. Aida, let's jump over to you. What do you think is a monster?
So I don't think there's a wrong answer, and I do think that it's different for different people. So I'm going to say that I think that monsters are defined subjectively, and that sort of ties into the way that I portrayed it in my story,
Yeah.
where monstrosity is actually defined by the eye of the beholder. I think more generally how we use the concept of monster to communicate, I think it's like a quick, intuitive way to convey to other people who, you know, share a common interest that there's a threat to this collective goal that they share. I think that it can be a call to action or a warning to regard something or someone as being in opposition to what the group wants or needs.
Yeah.
And I think the way that Naz portrayed it is really fascinating and like really beautiful. The idea that where you're then checking how you align with that thing that you're warning about. And I think that's really beautiful.
I love that you included in your definition this idea of perception, right? There's a sense of privilege in a lot of ways of who gets to call who, the monster, who gets to define it in that way, right? To define the confines of what it means, right? And it's subjective, absolutely. That's the beautiful thing about this show, right? Is everybody has a very different definition of it, and it's all right. And I love that. And I also love, of course, that you said it's a reflection of a lot of societal things. It's a warning a lot of the time. I believe that's the Latin basis of the word monstrum, right? Is it's a lighthouse, it's a warning. That's what the monster is. I think I could be wrong,
That's
but
cool.
That's really cool.
and I think that's very interesting. Like, for example, right, like cryptids, right? We love a cryptid. And they're so tied often to the local aspects of a town or something along those lines. 9 times out of 10, right, a cryptid won't do anything wrong per se. It'll be there when something wrong happens, when something bad happens, right? But everybody's afraid of the monster. Everybody's afraid of that thing, right? And I think that plays really lovely into your definition, right, of who gets to call who that and why do you think that, and what makes you so terrified, right, of something you don't understand, maybe, right? And so very fun, very fun. I'm loving this. Okay. Kristy, how about yourself? How would you define a monster?
I love that Aida mentioned the eye of the beholder idea, because I really view that that's what a monster. I mean, it's deciding. It's just like the idea of eye of the beholder for beauty, and I feel like monstrous and beauty are in the opposite, parts of the spectrum, right? So, and I think it depends on. There's a monster that's societal, like societal's perspective on it. Usually that's someone who, violates social norms or like challenges it, doesn't fit into a single category easily. And I think that's why that particularly speaks to the diaspora experience. I think then when we talk about somebody who, for an individual, what's monstrous is usually a violation of, ethical values that person has. But the funny thing is that I think is so fascinating about it is that you can have somebody who is violating those social things and can be absolutely a hero and beautiful to someone else and look up to them, and I think that's so powerful. And that's why the monster idea is such a powerful thing, it can, I always like to think about the story of Grendel and his mom, like I feel like, yeah, you can just, if you flip that over and see it from a different perspective, it means something so much different. So I love it. Yeah. And Aida's story, by the way, does exactly that. It's yes.
I love it. Yes. I mean, there are so many situations where we often feel, if you consider yourself different, if that word is forced upon you very young, you relate to that mistake. But that can be beautiful, right? Like it's like, oh my God, I'm finally written in a story, right? I'm that monster, but I am finally here and visible and existing, right, in a storyline, which can be so empowering for so many people, and that's why monsters are so incredible. They're the most 9 times out of 10, they're the most interesting character, right? Like they have so many layers and so many backstories, and they look cool, right? They don't look like anybody else, right? And as you said, Kristy, they in that storyline, right, they're in a sense allowed to mess up and to have these mistakes and to do these things. And you're right, a lot of the time that's where it gets complicated, right? Does the monster get defeated at the end of the story, and what does that mean for you, right? And it's complicated, which is why it's beautiful to have this conversation.
It's often like, I think for horror stories, that it's not uncommon for the monster to get defeated at the end, right? But what is that? And it's oftentimes a restoration of society at that point,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of disturbing sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It sticks with you very much. Well, Rowan, what do you think a monster is?
Kind of piggybacking off of what literally everybody has said so far. Because I think it was Aida who, it was either that or Kristy who pointed out like the Latin etymology of it. It actually has like the same root word, I think, as demonstrate, which is very interesting stuff.
I didn't know that.
Um, but I think going back to my funhouse mirror analogy, like earlier, it's not just what we don't want to be, as Nas puts it, it's a reflection or maybe like an externalization of the things we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. And like as a queer person, I kind of feel that just because I mean, I'm assigned female at birth, so I don't get this, but I mean, just look at the way trans women are like treated in society and just made to like completely demonized just for being themselves. It's really a thing where like society just wants to push back and just kind of make anybody who doesn't fit into their neat little boxes a monster. And I think one of the things, because one of the few pieces of required school reading that I actually didn't totally hate was like anything that was gothic fiction. I was like, yeah, bring it in. Um, a lot of vampire stuff resonated with me, just both as a queer person and then living under capitalism as we all are. The two sides of the vampiric coin, because on the one hand, you have this creature that has always kind of been innately associated in culture with like sexuality and queerness,
Yeah.
with like pretty much every portrayal of vampires ever. And you can even see this going back to like Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Dracula was the other in like pretty much every aspect of that. But on the same time, at the same time, he was also a rich dude living in a castle who fed off like the poor people. So,
Yeah.
you know, you give a little, you take a little. And it goes back to with like what Aida says about it being in the eye of the beholder. These are not like things that don't exist in society. Like these are things that exist with regular ass humans,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't want to talk about it. So let's just like make it into this Dracula guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It's that fun house mirror, as you mentioned, of things that you don't want to acknowledge within yourself, or within others, right? It can be so hateful, it can be so terrifying and so mean, right? For lack of a better word. And yet empowering in other aspects, as you said, Rowan, right? Being queer and exploring vampires, right, for the first time in gothic horror in general can be so freeing and liberating in a
I
way.
mean, yeah, like vampires are like my first go-to just because I don't know, I kind of feel a special way about them.
Yeah.
But also like Frankenstein,
Mm-hmm.
like intelligence is knowing like Frankenstein wasn't the monster. Wisdom is knowing Frankenstein was the monster.
Mm-hmm. That's fun. That's a fun conversation. Everybody come
Yeah.
back to we'll do Frankenstein's monster question mark after this. Yeah, absolutely, Rowan. Absolutely. And I think you said too, right, as you grew up, right, it changed too. Like you start to realize these things as you grow up and you experience life.
Yeah.
which is very cool.
Yeah. Like, sorry to get a little bit Anne Ricean about like monsters and everything.
Hey,
And
do it.
I also play a lot of Vampire the Masquerade, and like part of that is like the continuous struggle about like managing your inner desires.
Mm. And I think desire is actually a big part, too, of the exploration of monstrosity, right? There's a longing, there's a sense of somebody doing something, oh, that's bad, I shouldn't do it, but why am I so fascinated? Why am I so interested? Right? Quote unquote. So yeah. Okay, all great, all great. Alrighty, let's get into these monsters because I'm very, very excited. Aida, we're gonna start with you, if you don't mind. Please tell everybody before we really get into, right, like this creature. I'll say creature for now. Tell us about the significance of the silkworm, and this idea, right, of I don't know. I don't want to like give anything away. We're gonna just start with the silkworm. Tell us about the silkworm.
Yeah, so like a silkworm is obviously a real living being. It's the larval stage of the silk moth. And as part of its metamorphosis from like the baby larval stage to the grown moth stage, they become enclosed in a cocoon that's made from silk that they produce. And there's like a few different reasons that I wanted to use this imagery in my story.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, myself included, can have like this instinctive, fearful reaction to insects. And yet, in the case of the silkworm, the material that they're producing is a highly valued resource and considered like really gorgeous and really fine. And I think like what you were talking about cryptids earlier also kind of overlaps with this too, because I mean, there's really nothing to be afraid of.
Right.
But our fear of the insect itself can then make it seem like a monster to us, and it's really all in our own heads. Okay, I'm sure there's some evolutionary reason that we have these reactions, but at least in the case of the silkworm, I don't think we don't always have to have that instinctive fear. And the reason of like all of the insects that I wanted to pick the silkworm in particular is because I I wanted to write about silk as making fabric, clothes, or materials for various uses.
Yeah.
Because textile production played a really crucial role in the Indian freedom movement during colonial British rule. And I think people may be aware of some of this like in the mid 20th century, but even earlier this was already like happening as a movement. So when the British first wanted to partition Bengal at the start of the 20th century, they wanted to do that because it was too administratively complex for them to rule. Because you know, South Asia is a very diverse region. Like you have different ethnic groups, different linguistic traditions and roots. You have different religious and spiritual beliefs, and a lot of that doesn't divide into neat lines. And I think that's a really like beautiful aspect of the spirit of that part of the world, especially because like so there's so many histories from other places that also move in and out into South Asia, and that has brought about this very complex human texture. And I think, yeah, so the idea that because this was so administratively complicated to rule, they wanted to partition it by religious groups. And people didn't like that. So at the start of the 20th century, there was this movement towards self-reliance and sustainability. So they wanted to rely on the domestically made products and resources, including textiles, instead of having things like their cotton taken by the British and then processed and then resold to them at really extremely high prices, which you know would allow all the control to be held by the British authorities. So this was a boycott movement, and this is a tactic that to this day continues to be vilified and smothered by those in power because it's just that effective. And we've seen it like across the world in different contexts come up again and again by people like who are colonized, especially, to try to hold on to themselves and what belongs to them. And and I think that also fits with like taking control of your own narrative as well. So that's why I was trying to put these various themes together, and for me it worked. For me, it was like it worked in the image of the silkworm.
Well, dang. That's incredible. That's so brilliant. I I'm going to be looking up a whole bunch of stuff after this interview because that's absolutely fascinating. What a brilliant idea to utilize the silkworm. Like there's just so much. Oh, I'm so excited to read your story. I have so many questions. And this is for everybody, right, in the room. You can tell us as much about your story as you'd like. Obviously, no spoilers, because we all want to read your stories. But Aida, I'm interested. What can you tell us, I guess, right, about how the silkworm fits into your narrative, right? And you mentioned this idea of transformation, this idea of metamorphosis, right? In so many ways, even the historical context of what you just said, right? So can you just tell us a little bit about how it exists, I guess, in this world?
Yeah, so there's like, I guess there's a few different elements that come into play here, because sorry, can I take a second to think about this?
Of course
Can
you
someone
can.
else answer first, and then maybe I'll come back to this?
Yes, yes, keep stewing on it because I am going to be asking everybody too, right? Like, how does it relate in terms of the metamorphosis of something, the transformation of something? So be stewing on that.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Of course. All right. Well, Rowan, let's see. I think I'm going to jump to you if that's okay. And
That
please,
is absolutely okay.
please tell me too, for everybody here, if I mispronounce anything, please correct me and tell me the correct pronunciation because I
It's
want to make
okay.
sure.
It's quite a mouthful, and I've looked up like other words because this is a common monster trope all across Southeast Asia.
Yeah,
They are all kind of complicated.
in the most beautiful way, as they should be, right? As they should
Yeah.
be.
So the Manananggal, which is I think how you say it in Tagalog,
Yeah.
and in Malaysian, I think it's the Penanggalan. They
Hmm.
both come from like the same root word, which is like to bisect or to like come apart, basically.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
It is one of the most Southeast Asian monsters out there. It is
Yeah.
like very you I mean, like anywhere in that region of the world, there is some kind of myth about like a floating head baby eating vampire thing.
That is correct.
Um, that's just part of the folklore. So, um, I have a confession to make. My dad was a white guy.
A confession.
Yeah, just putting that out there. And I kind of wrote from my own lived experience with the protagonist, who is also biracial.
Yeah.
The the thing is, like when you grow up and as a Wasian person, if I may use the term very bluntly, there is a lot of assimilation that goes on in those kinds of households where you don't grow up learning like your Asian parents' language. You kind of, I mean, you eat some of the Asian foods, but there's a lot of white people stuff going on. And
Mm-hmm.
listen, like you have one white parent as well. It's not like that's not part of your heritage. But when it's like 90% white people stuff and like 10% Asian stuff and not
Yeah.
like 50-50, it is very stifling because it's not like those parts of your identity aren't there. They've just been like smothered and buried deep beneath the surface.
Mm.
And I feel like my story is mostly about that. How you can try to escape and try to like just assimilate into whatever culture you can, but you're only doing yourself a disservice when you do that.
I mean, talk about folk horror,
Yeah.
right? I think that's exactly what you're expressing, Rowan, which is complicated, right?
Yeah.
And I'm so fascinated too by how your story will play out. And I'm curious, what does the Manananggal look like, right? Like, and it can be your idea of what you think it looks like, but for people that may have not seen it or seen iterations of it before.
Okay. So the fun thing about like Aswangs, which is like if I can get into Filipino vampire taxonomy for just 1 second,
Please.
because so first of all, vampire is kind of a misnomer because vampires are dead. I have not seen anything in the folklore that suggests these creatures are undead, so presumably they're alive and they just do this because that's how it is.
Yeah.
So imagine like a person. They look like a person. Every single Aswang just kind of looks like a person, but there's like something kind of off about them. And the different tells kind of differ depending on region or who's telling the story. But my personal favorite is when you get up close enough, your reflection in their eyes is upside down, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's a really subtle and
Whoa.
cool like tell that something's off."
That's crazy.
That's crazy. But
So
if you
cool.
want to know like what most Oswongs normally look like, it looks like a person. You want the greatest monster like in the world, it looks like a person.
Woof.
Yeah.
The scariest ones of all, I'd argue.
And so the Manananggal, it's a subcategory of Oswongs because they all either eat human flesh or drink human blood. Like that's just a thing they all do. The
Yeah.
Manananggal is a bit different in that daytime looks like a person. We still got that. It's also usually a woman. Like there's been other genders of Manananggal before, but some reason they really love saying it's usually a woman, which is
Mm.
odd because most other Oswangs are like, nope, you can be any gender.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So looks like a woman, um, or like any usually a woman, but could be other genders. At night, splits itself in half, and then like some versions I've seen have like weird bat wings, some just don't elaborate how they fly around, but like it's floating. Imagine like a half a person from the torso up with or without wings, guts just hanging out there, flying around, and they're coming to eat us your fetus. That's just how it is.
Charming.
The other thing I want to point out is that in a lot of these stories, like Oswangs in general, they don't have fangs so much as their tongue is like a long proboscis crazy straw kind of situation. And that's how they get your fluids.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So cool though.
Yeah, it's like a mosquito crazy straw kind of situation over there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so cool though. Like what interesting attributes. And I feel like, oh, I'm just thinking of all these different versions of vampirism and things of that nature. And I love that there is this idea of also dismemberment in a way, right? Like taking pieces away, right? The flying aspects. You said it attacks the fetus, is that correct? Does it
Yeah, there is a lot of there's a lot of baby eating in Filipino folklore. I'm just gonna put that right out there.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's not really unique to like the Philippines. There's a lot of monsters all around the world that specifically eat children and or babies. But there's a disproportionate amount of them like target pregnant individuals and eat the fetus.
Obviously I don't want you to give anything away.
Oh,
Of course.
I fear like a lot.
Well, I'm interested. Will how do I ask this? Will that play a role in your story at all? Are we allowed to know that?
Uh,
We don't have to know that.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
You're gonna have to read it, everybody, to find out. Perfect. All right. Well, Naz.
Yeah, you're gonna have to read it to know if there's like silly straw abortion.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to with that exact thought in my mind. Well, Naz, you have somebody that you would like to talk about too. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Well, I think, well, okay. I'll say this. I'll preface by saying the monster I'm talking about is not explicitly mentioned in the story in Silk and Sinew,
Mhm.
but it's this notion in Armenian culture that just permeates our everyday existence. So
Yes.
his name or its name, or whatever, is Gurog, and Gurog means scribe or writer. And he's basically our version of fate or doom or destiny. And he's been around he was like one of the original pantheon from when back like when we were pagan and, had multiple gods that we worshiped. Gurog was always there, along with, all the sun god, the moon god, this one, that one. Gurog was there. And his trade is the notion of Chakatagir. And in our Chakatagir, literally translated, means forehead writing. So Chakat means forehead in Armenian, and Gir is the writing, to write, Garor, Gir, Garel. And so Chakatagir is your destiny, like the thing that you had from the moment you're born. And that's Garor's responsibility. His whole deal is to have everybody's fate, destiny, story set out from the beginning, and he literally carves it into your forehead. So whenever something happens, good, bad, oh, chakatagira, like it's your fate, it's your destiny, you can't change it. And so oh, and also in English there's the term of like devil take you, right? So that's one of the insults that like, so let Gurog take you. And so I guess Gurog somewhat over time has become synonymous with the devil or Satan too, because he's responsible for your death. I think like if I had to make an analog, it'd be like Kronos from Greek myth, like with the scythe, and just this old being hanging around, always hanging around and waiting for you. Um, so he's not in or in my story, New Ancestors, but I guess it's hard to explain it, but like Armenians have had I think our story, our like existence as a culture, our time on this planet as a people is equal parts beauty and brutality. And they like these two halves of the same thing. And Gurur is very much responsible for that, I think, because it's like this is all me. I'm not these are my opinions are my own.
Yeah.
If you step back, it's like there's so much shit has happened to us where it's like somebody like wrote this. It's just so much consistent letdown, slaughter, genocide. Um, I don't know. So it's like Gurok has he's constantly, I don't know, he's like lingering over everything. And so in the story, this something happens to the two protagonists that's uh, they cannot escape. And and that's like the idea of Chakadagit, like you can't do anything about it. And I guess that's what it is, that you can't do anything about it. That as much as we try, even the trying is part of your Chakadagit. Even everything you do, everything you think to counter, it's all part of Guru's vibe. It's all part of Guru's story. And he is there the second you were born, and he scratched into your forehead, and he's going to scratch your name off of his big old endless book whenever it comes time for you to die. Um, I don't know. I have a hard time articulating like exactly what or how I feel about it. It's easier for me to like write about it, I guess, and let you come up with the answer.
Yeah.
But that's the long and short of it. He's basically like Father Time for us. And he's there when we are born, and he'll be there when we die.
Whoa. That's so haunting in like the best way.
Yeah.
Right? Like you said, there, I mean, so many mixed emotions. that come with that, right? And this idea too, so like, right, was pain always in the destiny, right? Was pain always supposed to happen? Were these dark things always supposed to be? And that's so complicated and so difficult to process and to explore,
Yeah.
right? And you know, talking about our conversation today, and you know, something very interesting that all three of you have explored both in your stories but also in the conversation today, right, is this idea of metamorphosis and transformation, whether that's with you as a human, whether that's society, whether that's culturally, right? And it's interesting, it makes you wonder, like with Goroch, like can you have transformation? Does that exist?
Mm.
You know what I mean? And I'm curious, what do you think, Naz?
I think now we're talking about like ontology and free will.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's not even noon yet.
I know.
Um, I I think it's okay to talk about these things,
Mm,
but I don't think having a concrete answer is the way to go
mm,
because I don't think we can know. I really don't think we have an answer. And so putting your cards on one side or the other while helping to ground you on like in a corporeal sense, right? I think like spiritually or metaphysically, I can't answer that because I truly don't know. And
mm,
not knowing, I've come to accept not knowing as being okay. Like, because I think it is okay. I truly do. I think the thing that for me that like it's easier to just exist in the moment rather than thinking for these things and that things. And I know it's like kind of whitewashing and simplifying existence a little bit, but
mm.
um, I don't like, and whether that's a choice or something that was written by Gurov or somebody else or something else,
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like I can't answer
yeah,
that, and I'm okay with not being able to answer that. I think
yeah.
that's what we toil with in our writing or our creative endeavors, or just discussions like this. But
Mm,
I don't think anybody could come to an answer
mm.
ever until we die or like move on or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really don't know. I can't emphasize how much I don't know.
But that's a brilliant answer. It is,
I mean,
Naz.
I just sound like a silly rambler, but okay, I'll
No,
take
you
it.
don't. You don't, right? I mean, and it even refers back to your initial definition of monster and monstrosity, right? The fear of the unknown and how scary that can be. And also kind of I don't want to be this. I don't know what that is. Like I'm afraid. I'm so
Sure.
afraid to be a mistake or to make one, right? And
Yeah.
go for it. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, to tie that in with the story, like, uh, in Silk and Sinew, it's touches a little bit on what Rowan said too about like the biracial nature. I'm not. Both my parents are Armenian, and they both came here when they were relatively young. Like they met in high school.
Yeah.
So, but like in LA, there's a I think outside of Armenia, LA has the highest concentration of Armenians. So I grew up very, very Armenian. I mean, I was born and raised here, but like people, non-Armenian people have said, "Oh, where are you from? Where's your accent from?" I'm like, dude, I was born like 10 minutes
LA.
ago, you know?
Yeah.
But so I grew up very Armenian, and yet I still get in this country, you know, born in this country, and yet I still get those experiences of like, where are you from? And then when you go to Armenia, you're not Armenian enough there,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not American enough here, or whatever. So it's this like liminal purgatory that where you exist as a person that identifies with a culture, right? Like not as a human being, but as like a cultural entity.
Yeah.
And so, like the boys in my story, they're biracial. They're half Armenian, half American, or half white, half Irish American, and they go to Armenia for the first time, and just really horrible shit happens to them in Armenia. Um, just as because a lot of horrible shit has happened in Armenia, and so it's this basically they're I'm not going to give it away, but they are picked up by this group of people, this group of desperate Armenians who are trying to fight what's happening to our people over centuries and centuries, right? They want to turn the tide of the Armenian destiny, but that's the thing. Can they? Can you actually turn the tide? Or is all of this part of our Jakadagir? Is what they're doing to these boys part of the Jakadagir? Or are they actually like going off script? I think that I think that's what one of the things that why we write and why we make art is to at least have those conversations with ourselves first. And then if other people are, if we're lucky enough to have other people read our stuff, then it like allows them to maybe think about it and then conversations happen. The answer is ultimately unimportant, I think. It's just the fact that we talk about it and acknowledge that this is something that ought to be discussed,
Mm-hmm.
Geopolitics and all this other stuff with like what's happening in Armenia is so complicated that it's pointless to talk about here because you guys aren't Armenian and there's so much shit to actually go into. But that's the only way I, as an individual, can deal with it because I can't go and save Armenia. I can't bring back the 1.5 million people that were killed in the genocide.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get the land back that Azerbaijan stole 2 years ago and cleanse that whole part of the country. I could just write little stories about how I feel about all those things, concentrated into, in this case, 2 unfortunate teenagers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just put me on.
So much, like as talking about my own childhood, like that matters. There's going to be a kid who reads that, someone who reads that, and it empowers them. It's so important. It's part of the fight.
I hope so, because I mean, like there are a handful of Armenian writers. Tallinn Bosuni is a very good friend of mine. She writes rom-coms, but she has such a deft way of like weaving in Armenian cultural and political problems into the stories. And then there's Jolie Tumajan. She's an Armenian writer too, and she writes horror. So like I can't think of, other than me and Jolie, like I can't think of other Armenian people writing like weird fucked up horror about being Armenian. So it's cool to be part of that crew and doing these things, but yeah, I guess it's our Jakadagir. What can we do?
I'm so excited to read it.
Can I tell you a quick silly story?
Please, that's
So
absolutely.
the story that I have with Gurov in it is called Jakadagir, and it's about this little girl who her brother passes away when they're both young, and she has like an unintentional hand in his death. The whole story is about tradition and blah blah blah. It's sort of based on a short film I made, but I deviate from it. Anyway, many years ago, I think I was watching Nat Geo or something, and there's a creature called the Ai in Madagascar. I don't know if you guys have seen this thing. It's creepy, weird-looking little thing. Got big bug eyes, and it has like a regular 5-fingered hand, but the middle finger is very long.
Wait, I think I vaguely recall.
And it like taps on trees. It taps on tree trunks like this to encourage bugs to like come forward. And then with its finger, scrapes it out and eats these bugs. Oof. And I thought, that's terrifying. I have to do that for something. I have to like bank that for something. And I thought, oh, cool. Gurov should have that appendage. Like that's what he writes with. That's what he carves into your forehead. That's his writing utensil. Oh. And so I was writing the story, and I had music on. I usually write without headphones, but it was nighttime, and so I was writing, and I was writing about Gurov like tapping on the door, and I'm not kidding. I hear, and stop coming from right behind me where that painting is.
No,
and I'm like, oh, it's just my imagination. I put it back and I keep going. I hear it again, and like I go out to the living room. My wife is watching. I'm like, do you hear that? She's like, no. I'm like, okay. So I go back, third time. Starts happening again. So I go out to the living room, I open our windows, and like half expect to see like Gurov ready to take me, But I look out, and like these Spanish style houses have like little binocular looking thingies that are vents. In that vent, which is right by that lamp above my head, there's an owl just going to town on something, and its talons are just going Yeah. I was like, okay, cool. That's good synchronicity.
That's gotta mean something. That's too
And I did put the
coincidental.
owl in something else too. I put that owl in another story, which is a bad
Oofus.
story. I have to rework it, but the yeah.
Oh,
Anyway,
I would have had a heart attack.
yeah. It scared it really bothered me because I thought I was either losing my mind or being stalked by Godot.
Jeez. Oh
But there's
my
an owl in
gosh.
there.
Oh my
I
gosh.
also kind of like take inspirations from like non-Filipino
Yeah.
stuff as well, going back on like him taking inspo that kind of inspire me are actually based on Japanese. If you know anything about like things in Japan have with each other, like at all, it's not very nice. I don't know. I just like to call it reparations.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I need you each to know that I am very, very, very excited to read each of your stories. For the sake of time, I have just like 2 or 3 more questions for each of you, if that's okay. And Kristy, I'd like you to answer this too. Even though we don't have a specific monster for you right now, be I want you to be free to choose whoever you want in your mind, right? So I'll start with you, Aida. So you can also answer the previous question too. I think you can rope it in to this question. For each of you, how has the exploration, right, of these beings, have they paralleled transformation for yourself in your own lives, right? Or how have they aided in transformation and metamorphosis, right, for you? And that can be in any context, right? You as a person, culturally, in society, as a writer, right? I'm really curious to see if there have been any parallels. And Aida, I want to start with you.
Thank you for letting me stew on that a bit because I was
Yes.
just ready to like spoil everything, and
No, I
I
get
need
it.
a second to like talk about it with a little bit of distance. So, yeah, so sort of based like connecting to what you're saying now and what you were asking before about like metamorphosis and what it is. Like obviously like it's a process of change, but what I think is really fascinating about it is that it invites so many different questions to explore about that process. Um, what is causing the change? Why is it happening in this particular time and place? And you know, related to what was being discussed before, is there free will? Is it voluntary, or does the change, does it involve any kind of agency or autonomy, or is it coercive? Is it random? And then how does the change process relate to other people and their changing process as well? So some of these questions are like the angle that I was coming at when I wrote my story for Silk and Sinew. And without going into like plot details,
Sure.
there's some, it's almost like there's like an arc in how the theme of change can be considered. So there's going back to the eye of the beholder in defining monstrosity. In that angle, there's a lack of agency in how someone else's view of you can define you. And you know, you might not want it, you might not agree with it, and you might not even understand what's happening, which is pretty terrifying, I think. And then as that change is happening, you can reclaim that monstrosity, you can reclaim the changes that are happening, and use them for survival. And this isn't always a pretty process. It can be ugly, it can be painful for you, it can be painful for the people around you. But you've been put in this situation, and that's just the tools, that's all you have. And then finally, like, that can be passed forward. And it can be, you know, something out of love that you're taught as a survival skill. It can be intergenerational trauma that you inherit that continues to haunt you. And I think this arc of metamorphosis is built into the, I guess, the speculative aspects of the metamorphosis in the story that I wrote.
Yeah.
And you know, I can't hear the word metamorphosis and not think about one of my favorite stories from by Kafka,
Mm.
because that considers a lot of these topics, like about agency, autonomy, and also in some ways like revealing the truth about what you mean to other people. And I think actually this is captured really beautifully in a modern day meme. I guess it's a meme. I don't know if it's a meme or just a question, but this would you still love, what would you love me if I was a worm? Is that what it is? Yeah. But the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my God, Kafka, I love this question so much because it resonates so much for me. Yeah, so in that sense, yeah, I feel like there is a lot of a personal journey there as well, that with the what metamorphosis can mean and how you position yourself in that arc of change and also in relation to other people.
Beautifully said, and so layered, and I I love it. I love it. I love this idea of being retrospective. I love this idea of asking yourself these questions, these hard questions, because change is never easy, ever. Right? Like even just thinking about the idea of bugs and the silkworm, and we're talking about the roach, right? Whatever, the worm, right? It's not a easy process by any means. And it actually relates to, I'm going to forget the name of the specific butterfly. I can't remember. It might even be a monarch. I could be wrong. But scientists have been really interested in the migration patterns of monarchs, obviously, for centuries. And I forgot in which specific giant body of water, but for years, they've noticed that monarchs will go to the middle of the ocean, right, fly over, and make a giant, like half oval, like go around something, and then go forward, right? And they're like, what are they doing, right? Like, there's nothing there. Like, why are they going around something invisible, right? And they realized, right, that centuries ago, there was a giant mountain in that area, right? Giant mountain that like protruded from the ocean. And oh, you're fine, Rowan. I see your comment saying audio keeps going in and out. We can hear you, and if something goes wrong, we'll tell you for sure. Yes, okay, so yeah, right, centuries ago, there used to be this giant mountain, right? And so they're like, oh, so like biologically, genetically, they were told, hey, watch this mountain, which is a crazy thought,
That's
right? So
incredible.
does experience pass on through cells and through organisms, right? They've never
And
been over this
memory, right?
ocean, through
Yeah, it's like
memory.
collective memory. Yeah.
Yes, collective, right? And I find that so beautiful, but also painful
Yeah.
because there's so much you carry with you in these transformations, things that you're not even aware of, right? And I think you speak to that beautifully, i.e. that idea, right, of that painful change, but also gaining autonomy, figuring out who you are, right? And even though for centuries they're telling you who to be, and that could be good and that could be bad, right? So I love it. I love these bug analogies and metaphors and what have you. I think that's incredible.
And actually touching on this, there is like this is like not a happy thing, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of there's like a high incidence of metabolic disease in South Asian people, and so, like scientists and have think that there might be something there in inherited like experiences of famine. So that's like something that's also carried through bodies and through generations. And like what you were saying about the migration patterns as well. There's a lot, and I think this is why like Kristy's whole conceptualizing of this anthology is so brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it is that, right? It is the soil in our bodies, our families in our bodies, our ancestors in our bodies, and and how then that carries forward into what we do wherever we are in any moment or in any place.
Shoot. That wow, we're having a lot of mind-breaking moments today. I'm very excited about this conversation. Rowan, if you can hear us, hopefully we can hear you just fine. Right, similar question. How has exploring your monster, well, I don't want to say monster because you're going to answer that question, but how has exploring this creature, right? How has that influenced maybe your transformation as well?
The thing I learned just like these past few years, like, and I say this both as a queer individual and like a person just more generally, is even if you don't want to like accept a part of yourself, or if society doesn't want to, it cannot erase like everything about you from existence. Like they've tried that with queer people, they're still trying. They try that with like literally every like other minority that exists. Like, let's be real. It's all gonna bubble up and come back like just from underneath the surface. And like denial is only gonna make that whole thing harder. Because like when we say metamorphosis, you think of the caterpillar like becoming the butterfly, but the blueprint for the butterfly it would become was always in there. Like it, like even like when it's in its goop form, like in that cocoon, it's not gonna become anything else. And that's as scary as that is. Like, I don't want to say like you are defined by your biology and this is your destiny, because that's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I am saying that like you can only run from like the truth for so long before like you have to accept that it was always going to be this way. Like maybe you are really trans, maybe you are really like gay or like whatever else. And resisting that is only like cutting open the cocoon prematurely, or like trying to resist that metamorphosis is only going to end up hurting yourself in the end. I don't know. Maybe I went way off topic, but
No, you sure didn't. No, you're absolutely freaking on the money. Absolutely. And it's so, it can be terrifying, it can be empowering. And I know we're keeping it in the bug realm. I love bugs. I remember once
it was either that or Pokemon.
which also love Pokemon clearly as well. But Rowan, what you said reminded me too of another story my therapist told me a couple of years ago, right? With this idea of, it's just a story, like a basic story about how this woman, right, in her backyard, she saw that there was a cocoon, right, in one of her bushes, and she was so excited. She did research. She was like, wow, what butterfly is this going to be, right? And she noticed that, you know, she waited every day until it came out of its cocoon, and the minute that it did, she was there and she saw the butterfly trying to get out, right? Trying to get out, as they do, right? As they break open. And you know what happens, right? They're full of the goo, right? They're full of all of this wet stuff and things. And it was trying to get out. And as it was doing it, right, in her mind, right, thinking that she was doing all of the right things, she was like, I want to help. I want to help it. I want to help it, you know, get out of the cocoon. So, you know, with like little like sticks and things like that, she was trying to help it get out and trying to dry its wings and things like that, right? But unfortunately, right, within the hour, the butterfly passed away, right? And it's this idea, right? You can't force this change. You can't
Right.
expedite it rather, right? You can't tell it to do this or tell it how you want it to change and all of this stuff, even with quote unquote good intentions, right? In this story anyway, right? A transformation and change and what have you is so complicated, but it's yours, right? You decide, right? Like, and I know it can get complicated and sometimes people force things upon you, XYZ. But I think, Rowan, it says so much about you to be like, I got to that point where I was like, I don't want to deny any parts of me anymore. Right? I want to transform into who I really am. And seeing that transformation, I think, is so revolutionary for so many other people too, that might be afraid or just don't know how, right? And so I think that's brilliant. I think it's beautiful that you have that connection.
And like, I mean, it always cuts into like, I believe Aida was the one who was mentioning like Kafka's Metamorphosis, and also the Would You Love Me If I Was a Worm thing.
Yeah.
Story wasn't really about a bug guy. It was about a guy who like got some sort of chronic disability or take care of his family in the way that like he was gonna die without that becoming an issue, or you're gonna live long enough to see that happen. That's just part of nature.
I think you cut in a little bit in that. Rowan, can you say the last part of what you just said?
It's that like that's just gonna be a thing that happens to everybody one day.
Okay, yep. I'm catching bits of it. I'm catching bits and pieces of your story. I'm sorry. It must be the lag. But I think I got most of the story. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mostly just meant like everybody's going to either die before they become disabled or become disabled
Yeah. Yeah.
eventually just purely by aging.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Well, Naz, let's go to you. Same question.
I think for me, as I've been writing more and more about what it means to be Armenian for me, because pretty much that's kind of what I'm dealing with, I guess, in my writing.
Yeah.
My experience of being an Armenian on a more micro scale, macro scale, what it means to be alive, to be a father, human being, whatever. But Armenian colors all of those things. Like I said, I grew up very, very entrenched in our culture. I went to Armenian school until eighth grade. I married an Armenian woman. I can speak it, read it, write it, and I want all those things for my son. To be able to read it and write it.
Yeah.
And so, how Aida mentioned that it's the soil, like the soil of our ancestors in our bodies. I've now realized that we're like actively and knowingly encouraging that in our son, and there is a bitterness to that, but there's also a great pride for me in it. All this to say that this has informed like the transformation that I've noticed as an Armenian myself in my writing, and that I think crystallized, or maybe began to crystallize, because nothing ever really does crystallize, I guess. But while I was writing the story I mentioned off camera, the Armenians in Texas story,
Yeah.
that like unfortunately, and if there are any Armenians ever watching this or hearing this, sorry, but Armenians by and large are not like conquerors. We're not like winners. We're not, it's sad to say that. And, we've had a lot of great things happen in our culture, lots of firsts, as you'll read in the story in Silk and Sinew. And, we were parts of great kingdoms and empires and blah, blah, blah. But by and large, we've been trampled on for most of our lives as a group. And we're not going to like beat our oppressors ever, probably. We just can't. Just politically, where we are, geographically, it's just not on our side. What we can do, what we do is that we're writers, we're artists, we're bakers, we can dance, we can sing, we're musicians. All these beautiful things about being Armenian that allow us to perpetuate being Armenian. And those are the things that are constantly trying to be erased or appropriated or claimed as, no, that's Turkish, or no, that's Azeri. Like, no, it's not. It's actually Armenian. And so, like, our job, I've learned, if one wants to accept the job, is to make sure that, like, to be as annoying as possible about, like, no, this is actually Armenian, and telling those stories and being that person. And so, with the weight of like centuries of history on your back. You could obviously shirk it and say, no, I'm not interested in any of that. But I, you know, I, for whatever reason, have decided to like, yeah, be that person, or that is important to me. And so that's what I realized, that like we probably will never be where we want to be as a country. There might not be an Armenia by the time I'm dead at this rate. Who knows? But in realizing that, I also realized the freedom that kind of brings in being able to just celebrate the things that we can celebrate, which is all the stuff I mentioned. Until it's not around anymore, or you're not around to celebrate it. And hopefully by that transition, you've done enough to like allow it to accrete in the coming generation, like my son's generation. Because he's going to an Armenian school now too. And it's like he's taking a similar path that I did. And it's like, cool, he's going to learn about all that wonderful stuff. He's also going to learn about the genocide. He's also going to learn about how like we are constantly being like with a boot on our neck as a people, and not allowed to like be the best versions of ourselves, within and without. Like even again, as I said earlier, there's a lot of crap that happens in that country, inside and outside the borders. So yeah, that's what I've learned. I've learned that I think Armenia is never going to have its great golden day, but what I can do as an individual is to keep trying to see the golden day, you know? I don't know. It sounds kind of cheesy when I put it in words, but I think that's what it is. Like accepting it. This is going to even sound cheesier. Accepting the things that are, and like doing what you can about everything else. I don't know.
Like reading the whatever was written on your forehead,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, kind of. I think it's a larger conversation, but they're like, again, going back to Chakatagi, like as a country or as an individual, like accepting the idea of Chakadagir or doom, is that resignation or is that liberation? I don't know. In the case, to bring it back to Silk and Sinew, like the boys in the story have no hand in what happens to them. They have no choice in what happens to them. And yet by the end they accept what's happened to them. And so is that meant to be an analog of Armenians in general? Is that meant to be, I don't know. I really don't know what it is. I think there was a lot of anger when I wrote that story because of all the things it talked about, of like this desperation that like, and I wrote it around the time when Azerbaijan was ethnically cleansing that part of Armenia. So there was like, it came from a place of angry desperation, and like, how many times is it going to happen? How many times is it going to happen? Nobody gives a fuck. How many times is it going to happen? And everybody's going to just turn a blind eye. And so like I was the bad guys and I was the poor boys in the story at the same time. And, you know, I guess the author is always every character in the book or the story, but I'm rambling now, so I'm going to stop. But yeah,
No, you're
I
not.
hope I answered the question, and I hope I didn't blow hot air out of my what.
It was a brilliant answer.
You're too kind.
It was. No, it was. All of your answers have been up until this point. Kristy, I'm going to go to you to answer this question. And yes, I was going to say, I know we're over time. Obviously, we're over time. And so just for sake of it, right, this will be the last question. Kristy, your answer will be the last question. And then we'll wrap it up. Cool? All right, Kristy, please take us away.
Hey, wow. Like everything you all said is so amazing. And I'm just gonna sit here and think about it for so long. I wrote so many notes to things and reminders, things that I want to make sure to like sit with for a while. I think, Naz's story really like resonates with me specifically for Korean history. Koreans have this thing called Han, and it's kind of really hard to it's basically like, I always call it the burden you must bear that in your life, and because Korean history has its tragic story, and there's a sense among Koreans that like we're sort of we're sort of cursed, and that this just is just a thing that we have to do, and experience and carry with us. And there's, it's collective, but I also feel like there's an individual element to it. So that really spoke to me. I think that there's a level of acceptance, right? So that's a huge part of it. That's like to understand that you aren't going to be able to put it down, and that sucks, you know. But you guys also talked a little bit about
Not only not putting it down, but passing it on.
oh, that's
Yeah.
so exactly. And I was going to say like genetic memory.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah,
Oh.
like going back to what you guys were talking about, like the butterflies and stuff, that genetic memory, the even the metabolic thing, I'd never heard that, but yeah, that's yeah, that genetic memory is real. I'm sorry.
No,
I'll
you're
go back on mute.
yeah, well, it's funny. I was just, because I do a lot of writing about genetic memory, and I was just reading an article about epigenetics and how they did this like experiment with these mice. Basically, they would shock the mice's feet every time they put in a cherry blossom scent in there, and they found that they would take the children, the baby mice, away like when they were born and gave them to other mice to raise that had never experienced that. But they found that those mice, those baby mice, actually had a sensitivity to the smell of cherry blossoms. Yeah. So that they've found that there's actually like, there's ways that our DNA passes this information down, and that's again like why Silk and Sinew it's in the soil as our bodies. We're carrying these things with us. We're carrying that history with us, and exactly what you're saying. We're passing it on. And I think when it comes to metamorphosis, it's so strange because I think there's a lot of different levels to it. There's what I think that one could say, are we changing into what we always were, and we're just catching up and realizing it, or the world is realizing it, but also that we can occupy lots of different places, lots of different experiences throughout different times of our lives, and what that means. But it's funny how it comes back over and over again to that genetic memory. And I just feel like that's such a common theme for those who are descended from immigrants in general, that is, it's so present. You think, like my mom definitely didn't want me to be Korean at all. She wanted to have that be something I left so I wouldn't carry those things. And when you realize that, it's startling, but yet it's always going to come back to that. It's always going to be part of you. You can't, it's your Han,
Beautifully said. Ugh, I'm so excited for this freaking collection. It's gonna be amazing. Kristy, thank you so much for doing this, and all of you, thank you so much for being a part of the anthology. But it was also just such a pleasure talking to each of you. I know we could all talk for like 7 hours if we really wanted to, and I appreciate each of you so much, and you're all so strong, and everything you write about is so important, especially for today. And I just want to say thank you, and I'm so excited for May 6th.
Thanks so much for having us. And
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sinew, yeah.
It was really great being here and having you like interview us.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. You're all so wonderful. And yeah, if ever, I'm putting this on record, if ever any of you want to come back and talk about more monsters, just let me know. I'd love to have you. Thank you all so much, so much.
This episode of Floaties for Krakens was written and recorded by me, Camille Maria Acosta. A monstrous thank you to Kristy P. Kulski, Aida Shonibar, Rowan Cardosa, and Nazar Joyan for such a captivating interview. A big thank you to Michael Kosman for producing a stellar episode, and a huge thank you to Natalie Hedberg for designing such a phenomenal logo. And music for the show was also written and produced by me, with a special appearance by my tata, Toby Acosta. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. It truly means everything. If you have questions or curiosities about the research or media referenced in this episode, everything will hopefully be in the description box. And you can find us on our website and our socials, links in the description as well. Anyway, thanks again for being here, everyone. And just a reminder, it's okay to be afraid of the monster, but it's also okay to love the heck out of it too. Keep being monstrous and keep shining bright.